That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, y'all went crazy with the video yesterday, so we are going to go back and do the same exact thing at the wide receiver position. Now, of course, let me just give a quick recap on what we did yesterday with running backs. We are going over and we are pulling data from Underdog Fantasy. Over there, you can get into drafts for real money best ball leagues. They are the #1 platform for drafts at this moment. And if you go to Underdog Fantasy, make your first deposit with promo code FLOCK. They will match that deposit dollar for dollar up to 100, but that's not it. You also get a month-long trial access to our premium Flock Locals content with extra live streams, with updated Dynasty rankings, and you get our in-depth Dynasty research book for free. All you have to do is go make that first deposit on Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK. But why we are going over there and why we are looking at their data and cross-referencing it with Sleeper's ADP list is Underdog doesn't offer Dynasty. But what they do offer is the best ADP list that you are going to find. And the reason for this is every single draft on Underdog is a real money league with people that are at least 18 years old. Now, these sleeper ADP lists, I am sure you've been in your own startup drafts and you've realized this ADP list is garbage. I'm having to scroll 20, 30 players down before I find someone that I actually like. And because you usually have to scroll that far down, at least it happens to me, I'm like, well, yeah, Jerry Jeudy may be the best player here, but I mean, you're not supposed to pick him for another 20 picks. Let's take someone else and we can get Jerry Jeudy in the next round. And this kind of creates its own little echo chamber where people just begin taking players where their ADP is, and you just have that mock draft ADP, because most drafts on Sleeper are going to be those mock drafts where people don't really care and they're checking out by the 4th round. That just continuously makes this ADP list bad pretty much all offseason. And if we can instead create our own rankings, set the queue how we like, and cross players off the board based on how this sleeper ADP is messed up, I think we can dominate these drafts. I've done at least 10 drafts this offseason, and I felt very confident with pretty much all of them. But of course, before we dive into the players themselves, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. That should be it. Let's dive into it. And let's bucket these players off. Y'all know at running back yesterday, we went through and we looked at veterans together. Then at the end of the video, we are going to look at rookies together. And in between, I want to just be pulling up random players that are in line with their long-term career expectations, that are very similar with their age, and talk about the difference in this ADP data set that we are going to be finding and how we can take advantage. Because of course, if we are looking at 2022 best ball ADP, you are going to have someone like Tyreek Hill being way overdrafted compared to where he should be going in Dynasty. That makes sense. So we need to be comparing Tyreek Hill to someone like Davante Adams, to someone like Stephon Diggs, where they're all 28, 29-year-old wide receivers that you're taking on those competitive win now teams that are providing us production over the next 2 to 3 years. And that's all we're looking for. And let's bring up those players right away, because it's going to be a perfect example of how to take advantage of this ADP. Now, if you go over to Underdog Fantasy, you will see that these players are all pretty much being drafted back to back to back. You have Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 5. You have Davante Adams, wide receiver 4, and Stephon Diggs, wide receiver 6. Now, keep in mind, because it's best ball, someone like Tyreek Hill that may provide you, larger spike weeks is probably even a little bit overvalued in that format compared to what he will be in Dynasty. So if anything, I think we should knock Tyreek Hill down a peg. But even if we don't go down that rabbit hole, because of course we can talk about volatility, we can talk about how it changes the value with these players ever so slightly from the different formats, we can still have some massive takeaways here. When you have Davante Adams going as the 4th wide receiver in these 2022 real money leagues with real good data, then you have him going as the wide receiver 10 in Dynasty, which is completely fine. I think that's a fair price point. If you pull up where I have Davante Adams ranked in Dynasty, I have Davante Adams ranked as the wide receiver 11, because of course you should be getting those players at a discount relative to their production this upcoming season, because they don't have the same long-term outlook that someone like CeeDee Lamb may have. But anyway, if you go over to Tyreek Hill is someone that is 28 years old that I don't think we can confidently say is going to have his game hold up into his early 30s, given how he wins with athleticism. And with Tyreek Hill, he's currently going as the wide receiver 5 on Underdog and the wide receiver 6 in Dynasty. That should give you some massive red flags when there's that much of a gap between Tyreek and Adams with their Dynasty value. But I mean, if we stop there, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But if we look at another wide receiver that's identical to Tyreek Hill with his age, a 28-year-old option that's a little less volatile on a week-to-week basis, maybe you would actually prefer him in a league where you're submitting your starting lineup every single week like you will in your Dynasty league. There's Stefon Diggs. If you're looking at Stefon Diggs here, Stefon Diggs currently being drafted as the wide receiver 6 in Underdog for this upcoming season, being drafted as the wide receiver 13 in Dynasty leagues. That's 7 spots behind Tyreek Hill, despite them going back-to-back in redraft formats. Should there be a reason that Stefon Diggs doesn't have the same projection as Tyreek Hill in 2024, 2025? I don't necessarily see why that would be. I mean, Stefon Diggs is going to have a stable quarterback over the next pretty much throughout his entire career from this point. If you pull up my Dynasty rankings, I actually have Stefon Diggs ranked ahead of Tyreek Hill, ranked ahead of Davante Adams. And I don't really think I need to change this anytime soon. But if we use this tool, because of course it's just a tool, your player evaluation needs to go number 1 above all else. But we are using this as a tool to cross-reference our current rankings and try to figure out where there are maybe discrepancies. And based on this information, I think when you step into your Dynasty startup, probably a good idea to just scratch Tyreek Hill off the board and make sure you queue up Stefon Diggs because it's going way too late. Now, let's transition away from just bucketing those groups of veteran players where it is extremely obvious how we should be doing that. And let's go over instead to some younger cornerstone assets that I know you can maybe have some argument one way or another on why these players are valued as such, but I have to highlight this. And these are exactly the reasons why I think we should be going to Underdog Fantasy and using this as a tool. Let's go to DK Metcalf and T. Higgins. Y'all know with DK Metcalf, this is a wide receiver that I've been saying has been overvalued in Dynasty all offseason. I mean, he was going in the 2nd round at the beginning of the offseason. People were ignoring the possibility that Russell Wilson was traded. Well, now Wilson's been traded, and you've had that ADP update. DK Metcalf, currently on Underdogs, going as the wide receiver 15. Keep in mind, Underdog's a best ball format. DK Metcalf, a boom-bust wide receiver, similar to Mike Williams, is going to get boosted up draft boards a little bit. So maybe DK Metcalf, if you're drafting in a regular redraft league, shouldn't even be going as high as wide receiver 15. But that's where his efficient marketplace price currently is set up. T. Higgins on Underdog is going as the wide receiver 11. He's going pretty much a full round, I mean, at least half a round ahead of DK Metcalf in almost every single draft. Now, if you look at this from a Dynasty perspective, T. Higgins is a younger wide receiver. T. Higgins is attached to Joe Burrow as well. So if you're telling me, okay, Mason, T. Higgins is supposed to outscore DK Metcalf this upcoming season, just like he did last year. T. Higgins also is a younger receiver that may be able to continue to develop and continue to improve on his game going into year 3 compared to DK Metcalf going into year 4. So we have higher expectations for T. Higgins this upcoming season. He's a younger guy that can continue to grow into his role in that offense. However, if you pull up their Dynasty ADP right now, DK Metcalf going as the wide receiver 9 in Dynasty, and T. Higgins going as the wide receiver 12. T. Higgins is a 22, 23-year-old wide receiver, and he is going earlier in redraft leagues than he is in Dynasty. And this is something that's not just happening in mock drafts. I've seen this happening in our real flock startups. It's madness. It's crazy. Please use this information. Another example. Cross DK Metcalf off your list. It's ridiculous that he has an ADP that's pushing him into the late 2nd, early 3rd round, where you can get T. Higgins in the 4th round of these startups, and T. Higgins has a better projection this upcoming season and is younger at the same time. Okay, now let's go to another similar example. Let's go over to two guys that are being drafted back-to-back. You have Terry McLaurin, Jerry Jeudy being drafted back-to-back on Underdog right now. Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 19, compared to Jeudy, wide receiver 20. Now, y'all know, these are two guys I've never been a big fan of. I mean, particularly with the situations that they've been placed in. Never really thought they were going to be able to have access to an elite fantasy finish in either 2019 or 2020 based on the quarterback play in that offense. Now, that's completely different. Remember what we said at the very beginning of this offseason. We said, while we've always been screaming to sell Jerry Jeudy this offseason is finally a buy. Now it's a little bit of a different story depending on the league you're playing in because the quarterback was traded, but we were talking about the possibility of that happening. That's all, I mean, water under the bridge. What we need to look at now is how the marketplace has adjusted to McLaurin getting Wentz and to Jerry Jeudy getting Russell Wilson. And with the very efficient marketplace for this upcoming season, they are being drafted back-to-back. McLaurin, wide receiver 19, Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver 20. So we look at it and say, well, Terry McLaurin, 26-year-old wide receiver, hard to imagine him continuing to improve on his dynasty value going into age 27. Whereas Jerry Jeudy, today's 22, about to turn 23, but a 22-year-old wide receiver that's being drafted back-to-back with someone that's 26 years old. We would imagine, at least I would imagine, I'm no mathematician, but I would imagine that Jerry Jeudy here is valued significantly higher than Terry McLaurin in your dynasty format. However, if we pull up that sleeper ADP, let's look at this. Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver 29. Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 18. Jerry Jeudy's a 22-year-old wide receiver that's being drafted 9 slots behind his redraft ADP in dynasty. Another example, when you enter into these dynasty drafts, make sure you go down, scroll down, queue up Jerry Jeudy. I mean, this is something that I've made the mistake. I'm using this tool and I'm completely transparent when I update those rankings for everybody. You know that we are consistently working on those pretty much every single day. On the front page of the rankings, it says updated and then at some random date. In reality, they're updated every single day. And of course, go use promo code FLOCK on Underdog Fantasy. Get the month-long trial, completely free rankings, be a part of the flock, yada, yada, yada. But I had to go and move Jerry Jeudy up our rankings because looking at this, I myself had Jerry Jeudy ranked behind Terry McLaurin in Dynasty. Now, if we really dive into this and we look at just the offense that you will have Jerry Jeudy operating in this upcoming season, and we look at the splits with Jerry Jeudy on and off the field and how it impacted Courtland Sutton's production, we can clearly see Jerry Jeudy's the wide receiver 1A in this offense. And if we can project Russell Wilson to be a top 10 quarterback in the NFL with his overall passing yards and his efficiency in particular, and the departure of Noah Fant opens up a significant portion of this team's target share to be available for Jerry Jeudy. And I know Albert O, a lot of people are excited about Albert O, but he's not going to slide and take every single target that Noah Fant had. That can be distributed through the wide receiver core as well. So maybe Terry McLaurin does have that higher target share, but as it stands, it looks like Jerry Jeudy is going to be playing in the more prolific offense. And on top of this, you could see Washington go out there and draft a receiver like Garrett Wilson in the first round, which is maybe what people are baking in to this underdog draft price right now. So we should go through, take advantage, take Jerry Jeudy, push down McLaurin in our rankings. But let's go over to an interesting example before we get to the rookies. I promise we'll get to the rookies at the end of the video and some interesting finding with rookies. But let's go to two players that were rookies last year. Let's go to Rondale Moore and Rashad Bateman. Both guys, very disappointing. I think we can agree with that. And both players dealt with injuries, particularly Rashad Bateman. I think Bateman didn't have the real fair shot given the groin injury he had at the beginning of the season. But nonetheless, like I said, our player evaluation comes number one. But we need to be cross-referencing with these tools at our disposal. And if we're looking at Rondale Moore, Rashad Bateman, they're being drafted in a very similar range on underdog drafts right now since Christian Kirk has gone over and signed with Jacksonville. Right now, you have Rashad Bateman being drafted slightly higher. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 46, Rondale Moore as the wide receiver 50. And I agree with that. I think I would prefer going out there and getting Bateman in redraft and in dynasty over Rondale Moore. Bateman has a more complete profile overall. And with Rondale Moore, I mean, he averaged like 31 receiving yards his rookie season. But if we are seeing two players at the same exact point in their respective careers being drafted almost back-to-back in redraft leagues, while I definitely prefer Bateman, they should at least be in a similar range. You should at least have Rondale Moore going, 2 rounds after Bateman in Dynasty. However, that's not the case. While there's a 4-spot gap between these two players in redraft, Rashad Bateman's going as the wide receiver 36 in Dynasty, which is completely fine. I don't want to say Rashad Bateman's being overdrafted here in the slightest, given the fact that he's going as the wide receiver 46 redraft, wide receiver 36 in Dynasty, as a 22-year-old, very young wide receiver that had a complete prospect profile. I'm fine with it. But if we're looking at where Rondale Moore is going in Dynasty, in comparison, Rondale Moore is going as the wide receiver 54. 54. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 50 in redraft. This is another example of you getting to the point of drafts where Rondale Moore is going next to guys like Odell Beckham Jr. in these startups. Which, of course, I mean, I love me some Odell. The intro of this channel is Odell Beckham Jr. I wish he was healthy, yada, yada, yada. But this gap is just way too large. I'm not saying we need to go through and cross off Rashad Bateman at this draft price. But what I am saying is if you're willing to draft Rashad Bateman as the wide receiver 36 in Dynasty, better nut up or shut up and go out there and draft Rondale Moore 3 rounds after. Now, let's go over and look at another range of players not being appropriately valued. Juju, Ayuk, and Claypool. Now, I'm going to use Brandon Ayuk and Chase Claypool almost against each other in that here, if you're looking at their redraft ADP, Ayuk wide receiver 41, Claypool wide receiver 42. These are 2 guys that are very comparable with where they're at in their careers, both drafted in the 2020 class, going into year 3. Both have changing quarterbacks this season. There are a lot of positives, negatives. I think you can make your argument on who you would prefer to have for 2022. But here, what you see is their Dynasty ADP, completely being flipped. What's funny is you actually have Brandon Ayuk as the 24-year-old wide receiver, and Chase Claypool currently is 23. However, when they're being drafted back-to-back in redraft, you have Brandon Ayuk going 10 spots ahead of Chase Claypool in Dynasty drafts in particular. So if I'm looking at this, I'm saying, okay, well, why would I take Ayuk 2 rounds before I could just get Chase Claypool a little bit later on? But what is very funny to look at is a wide receiver that is pretty much the same age. He's 25 years old. I understand that it seems like he's at a completely different point in his respective NFL career. He's 25 years old compared to Brandon Ayuk being 24, Chase Claypool about to turn 24. But he's being drafted about 7-8 spots higher than these guys in redraft leagues. And I can completely get behind if you're drafting, say, a 25-year-old wide receiver at wide receiver 34 in a redraft format, and then you see those players that are 24 years old going 7 spots higher. I'm fine if you want to make the argument to have them higher in Dynasty. I think it's really going to be up to you, and it's going to be subjective based on your player evaluation on the receivers. And as I said, that should come first. This is a guideline. This is a tool at our disposal. And when we see massive discrepancies, that's when an alarm should be going off. An alarm's going off here because, well, Juju Smith-Schuster is going 7 spots higher in redraft than Brandon Ayuk. Yes, I'm fine if you want to rank Ayuk higher in Dynasty. Personally, y'all know I'm a Juju guy, so I do have Juju ranked higher in Dynasty than I have Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk is going 20 wide receiver spots higher in Dynasty. In Dynasty, Brandon Ayuk is going 3 to 4 rounds before Juju Smith-Schuster with this ADP. Now, if you pull up a Flock startup, that's not necessarily the case because I think a lot of people in the Flock like Juju Smith-Schuster, good or bad. This isn't to come out here and say don't draft Ayuk, but very similar to what we were talking about with Rondale Moore and Rashad Bateman. Are we sure Juju Smith-Schuster should be drafted as the wide receiver 49 in Dynasty leagues? I know this number is going to go up. I understand that Sleeper may lag with their ADP. But still, sign me up. Make sure you go down. Queue these guys. Queue up Juju when you step into your Dynasty startup. Queue up Rondale Moore. Queue up Jerry Jeudy. Queue up T. Higgins. Queue up Stephon Diggs. Take advantage of these draft boards being all out of whack. And now let's go over to the rookies. There's 3 group of guys that I think we really need to focus in on because, of course, everybody knows the elite options are Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Treylon Burks, whatever order you have them. I think if you're trying to argue for any of those players to be moved down in a tier with Chris Olave, Jameson Williams, George Pickens, or if you're trying to argue for Chris Olave, Jameson Williams, or George Pickens to go up with those elite guys, I think you're just doing it for clicks. I really don't necessarily see what's going on here. But if we look at this tier, Chris Olave, Jameson Williams, and George Pickens, and we look at the difference between their dynasty value and their redraft value, I think this is going to be shocking. Because, of course, I can get behind the fact that there are a couple things going on here. A, since this is a 2022 draft, you are going to see Jameson Williams be underdrafted in underdog compared to dynasty. I will be the first person to admit that. Jameson Williams should be at a discount in those underdog drafts compared to having to pay a premium on him in dynasty. That's fair game. I can get behind it. But we need to ask ourselves, what should the premium in dynasty be? Because if we look at these options, right now, you have Chris Olave as the top wide receiver in underdog drafts, wide receiver 48, which is pretty damn low. Keep in mind, these guys are rookies. You have Jameson Williams as the wide receiver 55 in underdog. I think you could make the argument that he'd be back-to-back with Chris Olave if it wasn't for the injury and if he wasn't going to miss potentially part of the beginning of the season. Then we see George Pickens, the wide receiver 63. These are drafts when there's real money on the line. These are drafts where people know what they are doing and not out there with 17-year-olds just mock drafting. No shade if you're a 17-year-old. But now if we go over and look at their dynasty price point, you have Chris Olave, wide receiver 32. You would imagine, okay, well, if Chris Olave is the wide receiver 32 in dynasty, maybe this means Jameson Williams, he can be higher than that. I'm completely fine, as I said, because I understand this data is going to be a little bit skewed given the injury. If you wanted to have Jameson Williams, wide receiver 30, wide receiver 31, despite him having lowered expectations for his own rookie year, I'm fine with that. But Jameson Williams going as the top 24 option in these dynasty startups. Jameson Williams, wide receiver 23, 10 spots essentially higher than Chris Olave. That's a massive delta to be looking at. And then George Pickens, what is hilarious, despite Pickens going 15 wide receiver slots, rounds behind Chris Olave, even behind Jameson Williams with the injury. George Pickens going back-to-back right now with Chris Olave in dynasty drafts. I'm tired of saying this. I'm tired of beating this drum. It's crazy that I have to do this because clearly it looks like the high-stakes redraft community, the guys that are out there with money on the line, they're telling us that Chris Olave, I mean, the NFL draft is telling us every indicator, every metric you could look at is telling us Chris Olave is someone you need to be taking over George Pickens. Olave over Pickens. Olave over Pickens. I will stand by that until we see something different. But I hope this video is able to help you out. I hope we are able to highlight some of the discrepancies that we have found. And of course, please let me know what your thoughts on this video were and why I'm so much of an idiot. And you can find the link to Underdog Fantasy in the description of the video in the comment section. Use promo code FLOCK when you sign up. And with promo code FLOCK, you will get access to our rankings for a month, along with a ton of other premium content. You will also get access to our Dynasty Research book. On top of that, they will match your deposit dollar for dollar up to 100. So please take advantage of that. And yeah, that's all I got. Hope you have a great day. Hope we get to see you with the video tomorrow.